Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Dingle, PhD. Welcome to the Wellness Cafe, and I am a researcher. That's all I do. I'm not a medical doctor. So I can't prescribe drugs or tell people to come off the drugs, but I can tell you that the statin drugs just don't work. There is no evidence out there to show that the statin drugs reduce your risk of a heart attack or stroke. And why I can say that is because of all the studies that have been, multiple dozens of them now, even when they pull them together in what are called meta-analysis, at the absolute best scenario, there is ever only a 1% reduction in the risk of heart attacks. Now, this is 1% in the best industry-funded, industry research studies, industry promoted and marketed. That's 1%. And I'll show you how they get away with what I call the statin statistics or statin lies. It's really simple. You see, if you've got a group over here who are taking the drugs, and there's 100 people. Now, of those 100 people, let's say 3 have a heart attack. Now, that 3 out of 100 is what percent? Right, 3%. 3 out of 100 is 3%. Pretty good. We all know our maths. Now, we've got a group over here who doesn't take the drug. That group literally have 4 heart attacks. That's 4 out of 100. And that 4%, you go, well, hold on, 4 out of 100, that's, right, 4%. 4 out of 100. Now, you and I know that the difference between 4% and 3% is 1%. You see, and that's virtually the type of numbers that they get in these studies, which demonstrates that the heart attack rates reduction is literally 1% or less. And in the independent studies, it's less, it's down to 0 and the serious side effects. But let me explain now how industry gets away with the lies. It's called relative statistics. Now, you and I know that 3% and 4%, the difference is only 1%. What happens though? In medicine, and only in medicine, they say, well, 3% is 25% lower than 4%. 23% lower than, so 25%. So all of a sudden, they jump up and down and go, hold on, no, there's a 25% risk reduction. No, it's 1%, but 25% risk reduction between the 4% and the 3%. So everyone thinks that if you take these drugs, it will lower your risk by 25%. Now that's a relative risk. In reality, in the statistics and maths that you and I know, it's 1%. It's 1% and it's 1% or less, and serious side effects come along with it. So what we need to do is understand statistics. Now, I've given you a very simplistic view, and all of the studies show exactly the same order of magnitude. All of the studies, they're either around 1% or less, down to 0, and all the independent studies show they're around about 0. And of course, there are many negative side effects. And I want to highlight this by the first big study that was done. This is called the Jupiter study. I like to call it the stupidest study because most people have been marketed this study. It's, you know, the bee's knees, and everyone out there, it's going to reduce your risk of a heart attack and stroke, and literally it hasn't. But this Jupiter study, they literally had almost 18,000 people in the Jupiter study. So it's a pretty big study. Now, the problem with this study, it only went for 1.9 years. Now, if you know anything about these drugs, then you know that the side effects for these drugs can come in right at the beginning and go all the way through, and most people aren't on these drugs for 1.9 years. They're on them for 19 years and 25 years and even 30 and 40 years nowadays. So the potential side effects get magnified even further and further. Now, let's go back to the Jupiter study. So in the group that was taking the drugs, okay, there were literally almost 8,000 people taking the drugs. In fact, it was 9,000 people taking the drugs. Now, of that 9,000 people taking the drugs, there were only 31 people who had a heart attack. 31. Of the people who weren't taking the drugs, around about the same number, right? There were just over 68 people who had a heart attack. Now, that's 31 here compared to 68. Now, you think, wow, that's a pretty big reduction. Not when you consider that there were, again, remember, around about 9,000 people in this study. In fact, it's a very, very small percentage. In fact, it goes from literally, for the people in this group who weren't taking the drug, that's 0.68%. 0.68% of the people had a heart attack. Now, in the group that had a heart attack, who were taking the drug, it was only 0.31. Now, you and I know that that difference is only 0.4, you ready? 0.41 difference. So the benefit of the drug was only 0.41, less than 0.5%. And yet, it's touted as being huge. Why? Because the relative risk reduction, the comparison between this group and that group, is literally 54%. 68% compared to 41%, 31% or 35% is literally a 54% decrease in the risk of a heart attack. Now, the stupid thing is, everyone out there believes that if you take this drug, it's going to reduce your risk of a heart attack by 54%. Half of the people won't have a heart attack or more. No. The answer is the actual risk reduction is less than 0.5%. It all comes down to how you do the statistics, and medicine is corrupted and it does these literally funny statistics, statin statistics, relative statistics, and the doctors out there just keep repeating it. But the evidence shows that there is literally no risk reduction by taking these drugs. Now, the interesting thing about this study too was that although they weren't looking at all the side effects, they found that there was a dramatic increase in the risk of diabetes as one of the side effects. Now, since that study, multiple studies out there have shown that people, you increase the risk of diabetes by taking statin drugs, not to mention dementia and memory problems and all these other side effects and muscle aches and pain. You know, in one of these studies, more than 20% of the people pulled out because of the side effects. So let's go back to the Jupiter study. There were literally, in the group that took the drug, there were 270 people who actually developed diabetes. 270. And in the group that didn't take the drug, there were 216%. So that's almost 50%. Well, in fact, it's more than 50%. 50% increase. Now, interestingly, when they reported it, they said there was only a small percentage increase in diabetes because they didn't use relative statistics. They used the normal statistics. And as a result, people thought, oh, a small percentage in diabetes. It's about 1% of the population who takes these drugs actually develop diabetes, which, by the way, they report in absolute statistics, the numbers you and I do. But when it comes to saving people, lowering the risk of heart attack and stroke, they talk in numbers of relative statistics. So in these reports, they actually swap and change depending on how they want to show the effects. At the end of the day, all of the studies, all of the meta-analysis, the Jupiter study, all of the studies show that when you take a statin drug, these drugs have 1% or less in terms of reducing your risk of a heart attack and stroke. Now, the science is there. If you don't believe me, go and check out the journals, but check out the numbers. Don't just read the comments made there by the scientists who are being paid by the drug companies. The facts and figures are irrefutable. Less than 1%, and in the independent studies, it's 0%. Thank you very much.